Take your Bible, if you would, and turn with me to the book of John. John, and we are in chapter 10, as we were last week. Turns out, chapter 10 ended up being, when we talked about it last week, it ended up being sort of an introduction to the sermon that I had in mind for today. These are two different verses that I have put on my list of verses that I think are often misunderstood. And I've been tackling these passages, trying to provide some clarity where often there's obscurity in understanding and interpreting a passage of Scripture. And I realized that two of these are back to back. We talked last week about the statement that Jesus made in John chapter 10, say that he came to give life, in verse 10, that they might have life and that they might have it more abundantly. We asked the question, what does it mean, abundant life in Jesus? And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Today, I want to zoom in on a verse in later on in the chapter, verse 34, where Jesus says to the Pharisees, Jesus answered them, "Is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods?" Now, this is the question that sort of hits us hard. How is it that Jesus is saying that we are gods? And it's not hard at all to find a false teacher who's going to run with this verse and try to say that Christian people are what they'll call little gods. As a matter of fact, it's all the usual suspects. It's Joyce Myers, it's Benny Hinn, it's Stephen Furtick, it's Kenneth Copeland. It's all of the usual suspects when it comes to this topic. They're going to run with it. They're going to say that you are a little God. See, in every way that Jesus, everything that Jesus can do and everything that Jesus is what you become when you're a Christian. As a matter of fact, one of them, they all have different ways of saying this, but one of them said, as I was researching this, I came across the statement that he made. He said, when God says, I am, I just smile and say, I am too. Because he's equating himself with God based on the statement that Jesus made in this verse, ye are gods. And so the question is, do we really become equal with God when we become saved? Now, the book of 1 John makes it very clear this is not true. Because it says that when we get to heaven, we will be like him, and we will see him as he is. Which means that we aren't like him now, first of all, and that when we get to heaven, we will be like him, but not exactly like him in every way. Because we are going to see him as he is. There's a distinction made between how we are and how he is, which means that not all the wisdom, not all the power, not all the authority of God is given to us now. But you can understand why people like to hear preachers who say that. Right? You can understand how it sounds really good. It's really encouraging when you're going through difficulty in life for you to hear some preacher reach out to you and say, don't worry about it. You have all the power that Jesus has. You have all the authority that Jesus has. And you're really in charge of this situation. Because, what we want to know is that we're in charge, right? We get afraid when we're not in charge. This is why roller coasters scare us so much. Because you're strapped into this metal thing, and you just hope and pray that it was made as well for this run as it was for the last run of people that just got off and all looked like they were alive, Like, this run is going to work like the last one. That's really what your hope is, because you have no control over the situation. And really, this is, I think, I don't know if I can speak for you, but I know I can speak for myself when I say, when I get worried, it's because I feel like I don't have control over the situation, right? I've lost control. And so for a false preacher to come along and say, oh, don't worry, you have all the authority of Jesus. You are a God yourself because you believe in Jesus. He has made you God. Everything that he is, you are. That's really, that really calms the heart of a worried individual. But the question is it true? It seems, on a cursory glance, without considering the context, that it might be true for what Jesus is saying here. But I think you know that is certainly not the case. And we'll find that as we look at this. So before we get into this, let me remind you what we talked about last week from John chapter 9 and 10. Because remember that in John 9, Jesus healed a man who was born blind. He was born that way. That was very significant that he was born that way, because it could not be said that he was blind of his own doing because he had done something, ridden a motorbike and fell off, and or done something foolish or something like that. It wasn't his own doing that made him blind. And it wasn't something that came later on in life. It wasn't something that some demonic oppression or some evil force had some involvement in making him blind. Rather, it was blind from birth, meaning God made him from birth blind. And so, if God made him blind, then Jesus healing him would have had to have had the permission from God to do so, right? It would have had only God can heal someone that he's made blind, right? Is the idea that the Pharisees and that the Jews had, and I think is a logical conclusion. And so Jesus goes and heals this man who is born blind, and the first thing they want to know is, was he really born blind? Can we prove it? And of course, his parents confirm this, and the Pharisees are frustrated about this. And the Pharisees are actually angry to find out that this man who was born blind was healed, because it undermines their position that people should follow them and not Jesus. Because it shows that Jesus has the authority of God, or else he wouldn't be able to do this. And so the Pharisees are pretty upset, because they aren't really concerned with who is really the Messiah or who is really from God. Rather, they're concerned with losing their own control. You see how the Pharisees would be the people who would want to hear that statement, "You are gods," right? And yet Jesus in chapter 10 is responding to that attitude, saying that is wrong. So already we know just from chapter 9 that in chapter 10, when Jesus says, "Ye are gods," there must be something more going on than him saying, "Oh, you guys are all deity. You all have control and have all the authority that I have." Certainly he's not saying that. As a matter of fact, the first part of John chapter 10 is Jesus describing the nation of Israel, God's people, as a flock. And he's saying, if you're God's people, then you're part of the sheep. And if you're in the sheepfold, but you didn't come through the door, then you must be a thief or a robber. Only thieves and robbers climb up over the wall of the sheepfold to get in, but don't come through the door. And then he explains, I'm the door. If you don't come into the people of God by way of Jesus, by way of the Messiah, then you aren't actually truly part of the people of God. He's explained this. And then he says, not only are you thieves and robbers because you got in the fold the wrong way, but you're pretending to be leaders and shepherds of the people, but you're not really leaders and shepherds of the people. I am the good shepherd. I give my life for the sheep. You guys won't sacrifice any of your authority for a blind man. You're against a blind man being healed because you're afraid of losing your power and authority. Me, I'm the good shepherd. I'm going to give my life for the sheep. You don't care about the sheep at all, is what he's saying. And so far, Jesus has explained this, that he is the door, he is the good shepherd, and he's going against the idea that the Pharisees are right and proper leaders because they have not accepted him as the Messiah. And the point is that a good leader of Israel would notice that Jesus is the Messiah and would bring people to Jesus. But the Pharisees are bad leaders of the people of Israel and are false people of God. They aren't actually people of God at all. You see how Jesus so far has set it up in just the first several verses. This is verse 14 that we talked about last week, to explain that the authority and the power is his and not theirs. Again, we like to stroke our ego and feel like we have authority and power in the name of Jesus, that all the authority is ours. This makes us feel good. But Jesus is not bringing that message in this chapter. He's actually bringing a very contrary message. We'll pick up the story then in verse 15, where Jesus continues to exert and establish his authority. Verse 15. As the Father knoweth me, even so know I the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. And other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. Now notice that Jesus, in this verse, verse 16, has moved seamlessly from the Father's sheep, of whom he is the shepherd, to his sheep. Because they're his sheep. See, before, the sheep were a picture of God's people. And now he says, they're my people. Jesus here is showing that there's really no difference. He is God, right? Jesus is God. Jesus' sheep are the Father's sheep. They're his, right? The implication here is that Jesus is God. He's going to continue this idea, and this is going to make the Jews very angry. He says, there are other sheep I have, which are not of this fold, them also must I bring, and they shall hear my voice, and there shall be one fold and one shepherd. Therefore doth my Father love me, because I lay down my life that I might take it again. Now this is an important verse as well. Let's pause for a moment on verse 17. Because Jesus is saying, you know, therefore, because of this, you know that the Father loves me. Here's how you're going to know. I'm going to lay down my life that I might take it again. Now, in a few verses, we'll read what time of year this was. This was during the Feast of Dedication, which is what they called, in this time, today we call it Hanukkah. At that time, we call it the Feast of Dedication. So this was in December, what we would call December, right? And so this was actually just several months before Jesus would return to Jerusalem. He would proclaim himself as the Messiah, and then would be put to death, and then 3 days later would rise from the dead. Jesus is saying, if you don't believe me now that I came from God, after healing a man that was born blind, just wait. Because here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to die. I'm going to give up my life. Nobody's going to take it from me. I'm going to lay it down. And then I'm going to take it back when I'm ready. And then you'll know that I'm from God. Then you'll know the authority that I have. Jesus is declaring his deity, and he's predicting his own death and resurrection. Verse 18, no man taketh it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down, and I have power to take it again. This commandment have I received of my Father. He's saying, you look at me, and you're just seeing this physical man. But I want you to know that I am God. And that if I wasn't God, if I and the Father weren't one, if I wasn't God, then I could not just choose to lay down my life and then take it back. No man can do that. He's showing that he is God and his oneness with the Father. Now, this is really interesting because when Jesus does go to the Garden of Gethsemane, he does so after telling Judas, what thou doest, do quickly. Remember, Judas was going to betray Jesus. Why did Judas need to betray Jesus? Because the Pharisees needed to take Jesus when there weren't crowds of his followers around. And so they wanted to get him privately. But the problem is they never knew where Jesus was going to be. This is why Jesus had a surprise location for the Last Supper. Because none of his followers even knew where Jesus was going to have the Last Supper, because otherwise the Pharisees would have known where he was in private, where they could take him. And Jesus had a sort of a surprise moment for entering even the city of Jerusalem. He had this donkey waiting for him, and that he sent disciples to go get. The disciples weren't aware of this. All of this was sort of surprise. Where he was going was very surprising to the disciples for those last few weeks, because the Pharisees wanted to take him and put him to death, and Jesus wouldn't let them. But then on the Passover night, he tells Judas, knowing that Judas would betray him and predicting that Judas would betray him, he looks at Judas and he said, what thou doest, do quickly. Meaning, go tell them where I'm going to be. Because that's what Judas went to do. And then Jesus finishes up his conversation with the rest of the disciples. He says, okay, it's time to go. And where does he go? Right where he knows Judas is leading the Pharisees to arrest him. Jesus is literally walking to the place where he knows he'll be arrested. He's just sent Judas to go tell them to come and arrest him. Why? Because he's giving up his life. It was not taken from him. Jesus had predicted this months before. I'm going to give up my life, and then I'm going to choose to take it again when I'm good and ready. 3 days later. And so he's predicting this months ahead of time so that they know, look, if you don't believe me now, just wait a few months, and you're going to have solid, concrete evidence that I am from the Father, that I am God. He's asserting his deity. Verse 19. There was division, therefore, among the Jews for these sayings, and many of them said, he hath a devil, and is mad. Why hear ye him? Others said, these are not the words of him that hath a devil. Can a devil open the eyes of the blind? A good question. And it was at Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication, and it was winter, and Jesus walked in the temple in Solomon's porch. Then came the Jews round about him and said unto him, how long dost thou make us to doubt? If thou be the Christ, tell us plainly. Jesus answered them, I told you, and ye believed not. The works that I do in my Father's name, they bear witness of me. But ye believe not, because ye are not of my sheep. Now he's coming right out and saying, if you're part of the people of God, you're part of my people, my sheep. You're not part of my sheep, because you're not part of God's sheep, and I am God. You say you believe in God, because they're all Jewish people, right? You say you believe in God, here's God in human flesh standing in front of you, and you don't believe in him. So, you don't believe in God, do you? Not the God that you said you believed in. And in the Old Testament, it was prophesied that the Messiah would come, the Messiah would die, the Messiah would lay down his life. This is actually given to us in Psalm 22. This is told to us in Isaiah 53. Jesus has, all throughout his ministry, fulfilled prophecies that only the Messiah was to fulfill. It is very clear that Jesus is the Messiah. He didn't have to say so. Matter of fact, anybody could come and just say, I'm the Messiah, but to do the works of the Messiah, to heal those who are born blind, to die and rise from the dead, that nobody can do but the Messiah. So Jesus saying, I'm the Messiah, isn't what made him the Messiah. And yet they're asking him to say, I'm the Messiah. Jesus here goes on. He says, believe not because, verse 26, but ye believe not because ye are not of my sheep, as I said unto you, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them, and they follow me. And I give unto them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall any man pluck them out of my hand. My Father which gave them me is greater than all, and no man is able to pluck them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are one. Jesus says, listen, God's people are my people. God's people are in my hand, and they're also in the Father's hand, and that's the same hand, because I and my Father are one. I am God. He's declaring to them that he is in charge of the people of God, because he is, in fact, God. And so the Jews take up stones to stone him. Verse 31. Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. Jesus answered them, many good works have I showed you from my Father. For which of these works do you stone me? Remember, Jesus, when he healed the man who was sick of the palsy, he first said, your sins are forgiven. And the people all got upset. How can you say that? He said, well, I'm going to prove that I have the ability to forgive sins, because I'm going to also say, rise and walk. The proof of his being and his deity was in his actions. He says, I've done all of this to prove that I am God, and now you're going to stone me? For what of these works do you stone me? Verse 33, the Jews answered him, saying, for a good work we stone thee not, for blasphemy. And because thou being a man, makest thyself God. They knew very clearly what Jesus was saying. He's saying he's God. Now, this is all the lead up to verse 34. So notice that what Jesus has done so far is he's declared his deity, his authority. So already in the context we know this is not about our deity or our authority, is it? So for somebody to take this verse in verse 34 and run with it and say, well, look, I am God. I'm just like God in every way. Everything that Jesus is, I am. Is just completely ignoring the point of the chapter. Even if that's what Jesus was saying, it would be completely out of context with the rest of the passage. Because so far, Jesus has made it very, very clear that you're not the authority. We're not the authority. He is. And the Pharisees who thought they were robbing his authority because he's the authority. And I think that this is going to have a really sound and helpful application to our lives, but I'll wait to make the application to the end. So now we've seen Jesus declaring his deity. Now let's look at the claim about the verse that Jesus uses here, that ye are God's phrase. Now he says, is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods? Let's go to the place where this is written. This is in Psalm 82. Psalm number 82. We'll read the passage that he's quoting and see what exactly, who are the gods in this passage and what is it talking about. Psalm 82 says this: God standeth in the congregation of the mighty, he judgeth among the gods. But then verse 2, he speaks to those people, to the gods, and says, how long will ye judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? Selah. Defend the poor and fatherless, do justice to the afflicted and needy, deliver the poor and needy, rid them out of the hand of the wicked. They know not, neither will they understand. They walk on in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are out of course. I have said ye are gods, all of you are children of the Most High. Ye will die like men and fall like one of the princes. Arise, O God, and judge the earth, for thou shalt parent all nations. So, if we ask the question, who are the gods here in verse 1 of Psalm 82, we're kind of given a couple possibilities, right? Either they're human beings or they're angels, some sort of spiritual being. They don't seem to be angels because what God says about them is that they're judging unjustly and accepting the person of the wicked. Angels don't judge unjustly. As far as we know, angels don't judge at all. But if they do, in some mysterious way that we're unaware of, they wouldn't be judging unjustly. That would be demons. And why would demons be judging anyone at all? Demons aren't judges, right? So this is ruling out any spiritual power when he says he judges among the gods. So instead, he's clearly talking about human judges. He is judging among human judges, human rulers, human authorities on the earth. And he's saying to them, how long will you judge unjustly and accept the persons of the wicked? He's bringing an indictment against rulers and kings of the earth who are not enacting justice on the earth. Sound familiar to anyone? We have 3 justices in our Supreme Court in this country who recently, just 2 days ago, admitted that they want mothers to have the permission to murder their children. We get happy about the 6 who voted against that, and praise God for it. But how outraged should we be that 3, quote-unquote, justices on the Supreme Court want it to be legal to murder children in the womb, right? But those are still children. And so this sounds very familiar to us. We know people who, in our nation, who are unjust judges, who who accept the persons of the wicked and do not defend the poor and fatherless. They don't do justice to the afflicted and to the needy. And so God is bringing an indictment against them. Why? Because they are standing in the place of God when they are doing their work. Like they are to enact God's justice. God has tasked them with that. Don't believe me? I'll take you to Daniel 5. I know you probably believe me. But just to make it clear, Daniel chapter 5 is the story, the very odd, unusual story of King Nebuchadnezzar, who lifted himself up against God and was brought down and made crazy, like a beast of the field, for 7 years. And here is his response, his his answer to this. Daniel chapter 5, verse 21, when it was all said and done. And he was driven from this is Daniel 5, verse 21. He was driven from the sons of men, and his heart was made like the beasts, and his dwelling was with the wild asses. They fed him with grass like oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till he knew that the Most High God ruled in the kingdom of men, and that he appointeth over it whomsoever he will. Listen, the point here, God is in charge. And rulers of the earth have a task from God to enact God's justice. They are representing God in a way. That's why they're called. He said he sits among the gods. They're to be representing God in justice. We see this in the book of Romans in chapter 13. This is a very famous passage. Lots of people are going to it today because of how evil our government is and wondering where we draw the line as far as submission to an evil government. Verse 1, Romans 13, let every soul be subject unto the higher powers, for there is no power but of God. Meaning, there is no power that exists that is not from God. God has given authority to government to govern righteously. They do not have authority to govern wickedly. That is not their authority. They have the authority from God to govern righteously. So, there is no power but of God. The powers that be are ordained of God. God allowed President Joe Biden to be the president of the United States. God allowed that. You say, well, we didn't elect him. That's probably true. But God allowed that. Okay? God allowed that to be the case in our country. And the same in every other country around the world, the one who is the leader, God has allowed him to be the leader. He's accomplishing his plan. You say, well, I don't understand how that accomplishes God's plan. That's okay. You don't have to understand it. Right? We don't have to understand it. God's got a plan. Okay? So, but here's what we're saying. They have power, but the power that God has given them is to do righteousness. Watch what it says. Verse 2, whosoever therefore resisteth the power, resisteth the ordinance of God, and they that resist shall receive to themselves damnation. So if you resist the government, right, then you're resisting God's authority that he's given to them. Not God's authority to give to them to persecute Christians, right, to go against his will, but rather to do his will and enact justice on the earth. Verse 3, why? Because rulers are not, and I'm going to insert the word supposed to be, right? Rulers are not a terror, or not supposed to be a terror. They're not giving the power from God to be a terror to good works, but to evil. Righteous rulers are not a terror to good works, they're a terror to evil works. Wilt thou then not be afraid of the power? Do that which is good, and thou shalt have praise of the same, for he is the minister of God to thee for good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. Listen, if you rob a bank and you get caught, that's a good thing. The government is doing what it's supposed to be doing, right? If you disobey a law and you harm someone, whatever, this is good and righteous for the government, for governmental rulers, police, whoever it is, to come and say, this is wrong. That is the authority given to them by God to enact justice on the earth. They have that responsibility by God. And God here, back in Psalm 82, is saying, you represent me before the people. You are the gods in the sense that you represent me. Verse 6, he says, I have said you are gods, but all of you are children of the Most High. So he's specifically talking about the leaders of the people of Israel, because they're the chosen people, right, of the Most High. But ye shall die like men. Which means these are just men, right, that are to be representing God in their justice. So you say, well, what is all this? Why did Jesus bring that? And I'm glad you asked that question, because otherwise my sermon would just been all over the place. So let's bring it back to John chapter 10 and explain what Jesus is saying. So far, Jesus has said, I have the authority. I am God. I and the Father are one. Then he goes to a passage that talks about people who are supposed to be representing the authority of God and are failing. And he says, haven't I said ye are gods in the law. Now, John chapter 10, verse 34, let's read what Jesus said. Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods? Now we know that this means that they were to represent God. The leaders specifically of the people of Israel were to be representing God to the people. Remember, he's talking to the Pharisees, who are supposed to be representing God to the people and are failing. He's reminding them of a passage in Psalm 82, which is really very specifically talking about them and their failure to do justice. And he says, haven't I said that ye are gods? Meaning you represent God. Verse 35, if he called them gods unto whom the word of God came, meaning you guys have the word of God and you're supposed to be representing God and teaching the people the word of God. That's the Pharisees. If he called them gods, to whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, say ye of him whom the Father hath sanctified and sent into the world, thou blasphemest, because I said I am the Son of God? If I do not the works of my Father, believe me not. But if I do, though ye believe not me, believe the works, that ye may know and believe that I am, that the Father is in me, and I in him. And we might think, as we're reading this, Jesus is using a contrast. He's saying, if the people who are the leaders of the people of Israel can be called gods because they're representing God, can't I be called God? And we might think, well, he's equating himself to just all the Pharisees who are leaders of the people of Israel. No, he's actually contrasting himself to that. He's saying, aren't I better than that? He says, say ye of him whom the Father has sanctified, meaning the Father set me apart. I'm not like you. I'm not a son of God like all believers are sons of God and daughters of God. No, I'm the Son of God that is sanctified way, set apart way, a way that's not like you. He's my Father in a way that he's not your Father. God is the Father of all those who are believers. We're all entered into that family relationship with God. But he's the Father to Jesus in a way that he'll never be the Father to us. It's a special relationship there. That's why Jesus says, my Father, often, when he's talking about the Father. Because it shows that it's his Father, not just in the ordinary human way. Right? And then he says this. He says, say ye of him whom the Father has sanctified and sent into the world, thou blasphemest, because I said, I am the Son of God. This is the answer to their question, because remember their question was, why don't you just come out and say it? Why don't you just come out and say that you're the Messiah? Turn with me to Psalm 2. We'll get to this in the next service. We'll talk about what the psalm is. But we'll read it, and I just want to point out two verses here. Psalm 2. Why did the heathen rage, and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and his Messiah. It says anointed there. That's the translation of the word Messiah. But it's the same word in Hebrew. It's Messiah. So it's talking about the Messiah, the anointed one of the Lord. The kings of the earth set themselves against the anointed one of the Lord, the rulers of the earth. It's a very apt description of what's happening here. The rulers of the people of Israel, the Pharisees, set themselves against the Messiah, the anointed one. Verse 3, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh, the Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet have I set my king, that's the Messiah again, my king, upon my holy hill of Zion. Now look at verse 7. All the Jews knew that this was a messianic passage about the Messiah. Verse 7, I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, thou art my son. This day have I begotten thee. To call himself the Son of God was Jesus saying, I'm the Messiah. And look what the call is at the end of that psalm. Psalm 12. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry and you perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but little. Blessed are they that put their trust in him. Jesus said, I've demonstrated to you very clearly with my works that I'm set apart by God, that what I'm saying is truth, because God wouldn't allow me to do these miracles that can only come from God if I was lying to you. And now I'm telling you, because God has set me apart and proven that what I'm saying is true. I'm the Son of God, and you all need to subject yourself to me. That's the implied statement. So here we have a verse taken out of context that appears to mean that we all have authority, we all have the power of God. But put back into context, we realize what it's really saying is you have no authority but from God. If you have any authority at all of your power and all of your authority comes from God, and Jesus is the one who's really in charge here. And though we often feel comforted by this idea that I'm in charge when we're afraid, we should not be comforted by that thought because it's a false thought. When you're afraid, if you're comforted by some preacher who scratches your ears and says, hey, don't worry, you're basically God yourself because you're a believer. And you have all the authority of God. Just command the demon of the car accident you just got into to depart from you, or something like that. It sounds funny, but actually, I went into the weeds a little bit watching these false preachers, and these are the types of things they say. I actually watched one who was saying there was a demon of an accident that you got into, and he was trying to prophesy something to it. It's just nonsense. But instead of finding comfort in these false ideas that promote your own ego and promote ourselves, why don't we find comfort in the fact that God is in charge? That Jesus is in charge. And thank God for it, because if I was in charge, I'd just make everything worse. Jesus is much better at being in charge than I am. I mean, so much so that you can't even compare the two. Jesus is in control. He is God. He has the power. He has the authority. And this should not make us depressed. This should make us very much, even more so comforted. If we're comforted in knowing that we have control, even though we always are making mistakes and ruining our lives, we should be so much more comforted knowing that we don't have control, and He does. Because here's the thing. It's not out of control just because we don't have control of it. You know, I had a few situations this week. They weren't actually really big, major situations, but they affected me, right? They weighed on me. And I'm burdened by these little things that just sort of heaped up on top of each other. And the next thing I know, I'm frustrated because nothing's going the way I want, right? And I don't have control. But just because things don't go the way that we want them to go, doesn't mean that they're out of control. They are in control. Jesus is in charge of all of it. He's never not been in charge. And this should be the thing we run to in difficulty. If somebody points you to yourself in the time of trouble, don't listen to that person. They want nothing but harm for you. But if someone points you to Jesus, thank that person and then forget about it because it's all about Jesus. And run to Christ because He's the one who's really in charge. Now, you might be going through some difficulty that's really difficult, or maybe you're going through some little annoyance that just weighs on you, or maybe you're in a really good mood today and nothing's going wrong, but probably tomorrow that'll change. Whatever it is, remember, Christ is in charge. He's on the throne. He's not lost any of His authority. And any authority that you have, or any power that He's given you, is from Him and comes directly from Him. And then the question for us is just this: what are we going to do with this power that we have? Fathers and mothers, you have authority in your family. What are you going to do with that authority? Right? When your kids are young, you have authority over them, right? Obviously, there's an age where you don't have authority over them anymore, right? That's not your authority, but there's a time when you do. What are you going to do? How are you going to use the authority God has given you? Right? Maybe you have authority over some area of the church, or maybe you have authority over something in work or on the job, or maybe you are an elected official. We have an elected official in our midst today. We have people here. So whatever it is, wherever God is giving you, know that it's God's authority And then say, Lord, just what do you want me to do? Right? The authority over your finances, over your time. Every little piece of your life, you have authority over personal life. How am I going to use God's authority? Because it's really His. He's given to me. Because we must recognize that Jesus is on the throne. He's the one that God has sanctified. And if you do not, if you don't do the works of His Father, we shouldn't believe Him. Let's finish off the chapter here. Verse 38. He says, "But if I do, though you believe not me, believe the works, that you may know and believe that the Father is in me and I in Him." Therefore they sought again to take him, but he escaped out of their hand, and went away again beyond Jordan into the place where John at the first baptized. There he abode. So they're trying to kill him again. This is, by the way, segues into John 11, where they do want to go back to the area of Jerusalem because they know the Jews want to kill him. They want to kill him again. Why? Because they know that this statement of Jesus confirms his deity, and they don't like that. They don't like it at all. They want to take his life, but he won't allow them because he's going to give it up in a few months from this. And this is going to prove who he is. We live in an age where Jesus has already died. He has already risen from the dead. We have all the proof we need. Now, we just must submit to him. Let's do that. Father in heaven, forgive us for so often wrestling our lives, trying to control them out of your hands. But Lord, we know that you are in charge. You are the one who controls all things. Help us to submit to you, Lord Jesus. May we have no king but King Jesus in our lives. May every choice we make not be seen as something that we have the right to make, but rather something that you have the right to dictate to us. And may we use all of the authority you've given us properly for you. And do justice with our lives, live our lives for you. We pray these things in Jesus' name.